Hey there everybody, this is my video tutorial on digestive layers, and this is for the digestive system, recommended for grade 11 biology students studying the digestive system and sort of just starting to get into the organs. Now, the image that you see here is something that I made for you, and it's available on my website at www.zerobio.com. I got lots of other resources there for you, so check it out sometime, but I'll also put a link in the information section directly to this worksheet if you want to print this worksheet out and use it along with this video. Okay, now a couple of recommendations for this. You want to have some colored pencils or markers with you so that you can color it as we go through it. All right, and what you're going to do essentially is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on one of these boxes beside these names, and I'm going to explain what these names are all about. And as I do that, you're going to see an area on these diagrams light up in that particular color. And so you don't have to use the same colors I'm using. You can use different colors, but whatever you color here, you're going to color on that particular region on all three diagrams, because the purpose of this is to show the fact that there are similar digestive layers between the esophagus, the stomach, and the small intestine. All right. There are a lot of similarities and there are some differences, both structural and functional in terms of what they do. All right. But the purpose of this is really to highlight the similarities and just a couple of the differences as well. So if you've got access to colored pencils or markers, if you could share them, if you're doing this at school with a lab partner or a small group, if you share those between each other, then let's all play nice together, okay? All right, so digestive layers, here we go. This is a cross-section of the esophagus, a cross-section of the stomach, and a cross-section of the small intestine, all right? And I've taken some artistic liberty, obviously, in designing these. And the idea is, if you think of the esophagus, right? The esophagus goes down your throat region and down your chest region and goes into the stomach. And it's essentially, it's a tube going down like this. What we've done here is we said, if this is the tube, let's cut it like this and look into the tube. So you're looking into the esophagus, all right? And your stomach is down there. Let's cut it and let's look into the stomach, and the same thing. I'm not going to repeat that gesture for the small intestine, all right? So this region right here is going to be the chamber that the food would go down. This is the chamber that the food is in when it's in the stomach, and this is the chamber that the food would be in, or the nutrients will be in, when it's being digested in the small intestine. All right, so let's just go ahead and look at the layers that make up the wall of all three of these organs. Okay, here we go. Now, down here, this is the key. And I'm going to click on here, and you're going to see a region light up in that color here. So let's do this. So you can see that I've colored this box in yellow. So choose a color that you've got available and color in this box. And then the same regions on these, cross sections, you're going to color that color, if that makes sense. All right. So the mucosa is a layer of the esophagus, stomach, or small intestine, the mucosa, and it is the layer most proximal to the cavity in the middle, most closest to that cavity, all right? So this region here is called the mucosa, the first layer of the esophagus. It's also essentially the first layer in the stomach, although there are some mountain-like structures and some valleys that I'm going to highlight as well down here in just a moment. So color this region in, and I've tried to make the cells and the ring look very similar so that you know what to color. So color the same color in the esophagus, this first layer, this layer here in the stomach, and this layer here in the small intestine. All right, sort of skipping over this stuff. Now, you're probably going to need to pause this video periodically in order to complete the coloring, or I might just keep talking and maybe you'll have enough time to get it done. So the mucosa is the first layer closest to that cavity. Now, I want to stop calling this the cavity. I want to tell you that this layer is called the lumen, L-U-M-E-N. So this is the lumen or hole or cavity in the esophagus. This region here in the stomach is also called the lumen. The inside of the stomach where the food is being digested, this is called the lumen. And it's the same thing with the intestines. So if you imagine the intestines all curving around everywhere, all right, the hole in the middle that the food goes through, that's called the lumen. So you can label lumen in every one. You can label it any way you like to, as long as you remember that's the lumen. So from now on, I can say the mucosa is the layer most proximal to the lumen, closest to the lumen. All right, I'm going to move on and look at the second layer. Now, the second layer has the name submucosa. Sub meaning below, like a submarine goes under the water. So let me show you where that is. All right, so I've colored this in orange, and you can see it's the layer outside of the mucosa. So it goes mucosa and then submucosa. And if I come up to the esophagus, I've got the lumen there, mucosa, submucosa. Now, one thing that students get confused about, it's called submucosa, which means it's under the mucosa, right? Some people think that under should be in here, right? But if you consider that this is the lumen or the cavity, under is really moving in the opposite direction. We have this first layer here, the lumen. Under the lumen is, that's probably not the best color to use, but under the lumen is the submucosa. Okay, so one for mucosa. The second layer there is the submucosa. Let me come up with something better. 1, 2. Hopefully you can see that. All right. So that is the submucosa. Now, color that in the esophagus. Color it in the stomach, but avoid this stuff here. All right. Mucosa, submucosa, and same thing. So they all look similar. I've designed them so that they look similar, and they are similar. There are some differences, but they are similar in all three of these organs. Those are the first two tissue layers of these three organs, mucosa, submucosa, all right? And we're not talking about their functions really here, all right? Now, the next layers are going to be under that, moving distally away from the lumen, further out, so more distal to the lumen. Why isn't that working? There we go. Okay. I didn't mean to point at that, but I'm just trying to indicate we're moving from the lumen. There's the mucosa. There's the submucosa. And we're going to move into this region right here. All right. Now, this is a layer of muscle. There's really a couple, 2 or 3, depending on the organ, layers of muscle. So, will you first of all note, and I'm going to switch to another color here, that I've designed this so it looks like rings going around, like this is a racetrack here and you're driving around, going around. This is muscle around, like if this is your esophagus, right? This is muscle that goes around the esophagus from the top all the way down to the bottom. Like there might be separate ones, whatever. And if you can imagine, again, I have to show it to you this way. If this is the esophagus, when this muscle contracts, constricts, or squeezes, it's going to squeeze the opening, the lumen, down like this. Now, these first 2 layers, the mucosa and the submucosa, they are compressible. It's not made out of bone, right? It's made out of tissue. So when this muscle layer I'm talking about squeezes or constricts, it will narrow the lumen. So the term is constriction. All right. Contraction is more for your arms and stuff, doing that kind of thing. Constriction is when you narrow a chamber, like think of like a boa constrictor, right? A snake that wraps around something and squeezes it sort of small to crush it. They don't call it a boa contractor, not that I've ever heard. It's a boa constrictor, right? So this muscle goes around circularly around the lumen and around the other layers, and therefore this is called circular muscle. So I'm going to highlight circular muscle, and I've done it in sort of a reddish color, kind of like a muscle, but wait till you see the next color. It's not going to look like a muscle. But so you can see that all of this stuff that seems to go around in a circle here. Now, note that I've skipped something here. There's a whitish layer. Just go for the ones with the lines. All right. In all three of these diagrams, and it doesn't have to be colored in red. It can be any color that you've got available, as long as the legend down here and the anatomical drawing have the same color so you can learn the layers. This is called circular muscle because it goes around, and when it constricts, it narrows the lumen. When it relaxes, in other words, when it dilates, it opens the lumen. So it's called constriction and dilation, not contraction and relaxation. I mean, it is that kind of thing, but the best name is constriction and dilation. Now, all three of these organs have had all of these same layers so far. So there's a consistency and a comparativeness between all three structures. Comparativeness probably wasn't the right word to use. Now, there is more muscle in the esophagus, the stomach, and the small intestine. And so I will now use my tablet pen to illustrate this. Let's go back to the esophagus. We said that when we look at it like this, that the whole is the lumen, and then we have the mucosa and submucosa. And we said going around it is circular muscle, squeezing it like this, constricting it, or relaxing to dilate it. Now, the esophagus is a tube leading from the pharynx to the stomach. And when it squeezes with the circular muscle, that pushes the food down. But you know the way an earthworm moves along the ground, or maybe a snake or something, right? It can squeeze like this circularly, but you know the way they sort of shorten and they move? They shorten. So think of an inchworm squeezing and moving, that kind of thing, right? So there are muscles that run not only just around that circular, but from the top to the bottom lengthwise or longitudinally. All right. And when this muscle contracts, I'm going to put that down. When the longitudinal muscle contracts or constricts, it squeezes it like this. So you can squeeze it like this and like this. And it's a combination of these squeezing, these constrictions that push the food through the digestive tract. So imagine you're swallowing some food, right? You squeeze it here and you kind of do this and it pushes it down. And you squeeze it and you do this and you keep doing that until the food moves all the way down the esophagus into the stomach. That muscular contraction or constriction is called peristalsis. All right. And peristalsis occurs throughout the gastrointestinal tract, throughout the digestive tract, from when you swallow and then it squeezes the food down to the stomach, and then the stomach does this as well. So it starts here and it squeezes and it pushes the food a bit. It squeezes here and it squeezes there. It pushes the food into the intestines, which then squeeze, and the food goes all through that crazy worm-like intestines. All right. So peristalsis is the muscular contractions or constrictions that propel the food throughout the digestive tract. And that's due to circular muscle and this other type of muscle that runs lengthwise down the esophagus and shortens it sort of like that. Or if you imagine the intestines, if you were to take the intestines all coiled and stretch them out, it would have circular muscle, I'm off camera here, but circular muscle going around and longitudinal muscle all along the length of it as well. Now, I'm going to show you where the longitudinal muscle is. Okay? Now, don't be shocked. I'm using this hot pink or purple color, whatever. So color this in another color, a different color than these, so you can recognize it. And what I've really highlighted here are just what were the white spaces out here. I've left the black, just trying to make this look cool. If you can imagine that, these pink areas are coming out at you from the diagram. So the circular ones go around the diagram, right? And they constrict like this. Imagine if you look at the esophagus, right? Imagine the pink rectangles, sort of curved rectangles, are coming out at you and running the length of the esophagus. I don't know if all this is helping or not, whatever. That's longitudinal muscle. Longitudinal muscle is located outside of the circular muscle. So again, very distant from the lumen. And the longitudinal muscle is present in the esophagus, in the stomach, and in the small intestine in the same place. All right? Circular and then longitudinal muscle. So far we have mucosa, submucosa, circular muscle, and longitudinal muscle all working outwards from the lumen in the middle. Now, in the stomach, there is an extra type of muscle, and it's this one here, oblique. Oblique implying that it runs in a diagonal kind of fashion, all right? So the stomach has circular muscle going around, longitudinal muscle coming like this. Just imagine another angle for this muscle. If you could picture a stomach right there, all right? I'm sorry I don't have a model of a stomach, but if I had a stomach, circular muscle could go around the stomach, making it squeeze like that. Longitudinal muscle lengthwise, and just imagine on another angle, you've got another muscle type. And this is because one of the main roles of the stomach is physical or mechanical digestion, right? It's got to really churn the food. So just imagine if you've got to do all that squeezing, you need more muscle, right? So oblique muscle is actually the innermost muscle layer in the stomach, but it is not found in the esophagus or the small intestine because they don't do a lot of physical digestion. The stomach does. So I'm going to highlight oblique muscle, and I've just done it in a sort of a medium gray color here. You'll notice it is a muscle layer that is inside of the circular muscle, more proximal to the lumen than the circular muscle. So in the stomach, the order of muscle layers is oblique, then circular, then longitudinal. All three muscle layers in the stomach. In the esophagus, it's just circular and longitudinal. Same in the small intestine. But in the stomach, you've got this extra layer of muscle called the oblique muscle. Now, I want to add a label on here, and I'm hoping this is not going to be messy for you. I might do it a little bit messy, but maybe you can find a nice, neat way of doing it. All three of these muscle layers, I'm going to grab that one. Nah, I'm not going to use red. I'm going to use black. All right. And I'm going to go for a bigger one. This, I thought I switched to black. What's going on here? There. This one and that one, the circular and the oblique. Not an overly nice looking diagram, but anyways. Also, in the esophagus, the circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle, or even in the small intestine, circular muscle, longitudinal muscle. Find a neat way of doing this, okay? Maybe watch what I'm doing before you actually do this. All right. All of this together is called the muscularis. Muscularis. Spell this out. M-U-S-C-U-L-A-R-I-S. Muscularis. In other words, the three muscle layers in the stomach are collectively called the muscularis. The two muscle layers in the esophagus are called the muscularis, and the two muscle layers in the intestine are called the muscularis. All right, so that's an extra thing. It's not a particular specific layer. It's just a collective name for those muscle layers, the muscularis. All right, and the muscularis of the stomach differs from that of the small intestine and the esophagus by having that extra oblique muscle layer. All right, so let's move on. Now, there are glands in the esophagus. I just didn't draw them. All right, the esophagus needs mucus in here. All right, inside the lumen, there needs this fluid-like mucus to help the food slide along. So there are glands there, but, you know, they're not anything special, not anything like in the stomach and the small intestine. So I want to talk to you about glands in the stomach and in the small intestine. Now, first of all, let's highlight where they are, and then let's talk about what a gland actually is. So glands, I've done them in blue just to make them look different so you can see them quite well. All right, color the box and color the gland. So if we look down at the stomach, we're highlighting these cells all right, formed and looks like a little bit like a flask of some kind or a balloon or something like that, all right? And you'll notice that they open into the lumen. So right here, there's an opening, right? There's an opening at the mouth of the gland. Now, a gland is a collection of cells that releases some kind of chemical or secretion, like here, that is then released into another body part. So, for example, this is a gland in the stomach, and this gland is made of cells that create chemicals, liquids, let's say, like enzymes, and those chemicals or enzymes are then released into the lumen of the stomach to do its job. So, for example, the stomach makes enzymes. It makes lipase, which digests fats. It makes pepsin, which digests proteins. It makes hydrochloric acid, which is involved with the digestion of proteins and other things, activation of pepsin, as you'll learn later on if you haven't already. So all of these chemicals are made by the glands in the stomach. These are specifically called gastric glands. All right, and there's not just 4 of them. I've just drawn 4, just for simplicity. All right, these are the gastric glands, and they release the various enzymes and acids, etc., into the lumen of the stomach to aid or perform chemical digestion. So these gastric glands produce the enzymes involved with chemical digestion in the stomach. The exact position of the glands, I've drawn them so that their fat part is nestled in the submucosa. That's not necessarily always true. Sometimes they're in the submucosa. Sometimes some of them might just sort of start here in the mucosa and have their tubes coming out into the lumen and all that. That's not important for us. Just the fact that the stomach has lots of glands. And if you ever get a chance to look at a microscope slide of the stomach, you're going to see these gastric glands. Now, there are another couple of names as well. This part here, down here, in fact, let me switch to yellow. No, that's not going to work. Let's try pink. You know what? Let's experiment a little bit here. You know what? I'm going to stick with black, but I'm going to make it nice and big. This region here is the gland part. The swollen part is really the gland. And then you've got the neck of that right there, the neck part here. All right. This is really called the gastric pit. So we have the gastric gland down here. And I know we're not writing down all these terms. I'll probably do that when I teach it in class. But for now, we're focusing more on the layers. But I'm on a bit of a tangent. So we've got the gastric gland down here. This is the gastric pit right there, the opening. I mean, think of it like, you know, if you were walking along the surface of the stomach, and then, whoa, I fell inside the gastric gland. I'm being dissolved by acid, whatever. You fall into the pit and you're going, I can't fall upwards into a pit. Well, that's just the way it goes, right? So that's called the gastric pit right there, and this is the gastric gland. But for now, we are just calling these gastric glands, all right, or glands in general. Now, it's going to take you a little bit of time to color in these, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit small for you, but these are the glands that are found in the small intestine, all right, and they're called intestinal glands. Gastric glands for the stomach, intestinal glands for the intestine. And just like in the stomach, they create various enzymes. Now, there is an acid there, but, you know, there's other enzymes that you'll probably learn about. And those enzymes are released through the neck of the gland into the lumen where they perform chemical digestion in the small intestine. So there are glands in the stomach and the intestine, and we're not bothering with any glands in the esophagus. All right? So those are glands. Now, you'll notice that I've left a layer off here in the stomach, this bumpy, mountainous kind of layer. We are now going to look at that, and I've colored it in just a sort of a olive green kind of color. All right, so just color all that region there. Now, these bumps are called rugae. Rugae is the plural name, right? One of these bumps, let's say I looked at just that mountain there, that's called a ruga. But if I talk about more than one, they're called rugae, not to be confused with reggae. That's the Bob Marley music, right? These are rugae, all right? Rugae is the plural of these bumps. What they really are folds of the mucosa layer, all right? What we say is the mucosa, this yellow layer, is thrown into folds. That's how they say it. Think of it like a carpet that's all bunched up, okay? If you take the carpet and pull it straight, it's flat, right? That's just carpet. But the carpet could be bulked up like that. So these folds are called rugae, and what they do is they increase the surface area of the stomach. You can fit more in. Like imagine if you're packing your carpet, right? When you go to transport your carpet if you're moving, you don't just take it flat. Like the way you roll it up and you go, hey, I can fit that in my car now, or something like that, right? You get more in a smaller space. So by having these folds, if you can imagine if you took this piece and you took that and you pulled it flat, it would be longer. But if you fold it like that, you can fit it into the stomach. So this increases the surface area of the stomach for digestion. Now that's all I'm going to say for the time being about the function of rugae, but you're probably going to see this under the microscope. All right, that's rugae. We have one more structure to do, and that's the villi. Now I'm going to show you the color scheme that I've used for this, the villi. And what you can do is you could just color all of this in one color. I've done it in green, but because this is a magnification of this, there's a little bit of red and blue. I don't know how well you can see it there, and even a yellow tube in the middle. I don't want to get too much into detail about what this does, but I will say that these are called villi, all right? One is called a villus, and many are called villi. And yeah, there's lots of jokes about the villi people. I don't know if you know the village people, the YMCA stuff. Villi people, biology teachers are weird like that. Anyways, there's lots of these in the small intestine, and these actually are extensions of the mucosa in the small intestine. Just as rugae are extensions of the mucosa in the stomach, villi are extensions of the mucosa in the small intestine. And they look a little bit like mountains, okay? And that's very common that they should look like that. Here's a blow up of them. And these are the absorptive structures in the small intestine. You probably heard that something like, 90% of nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. By the time food is broken down into the smallest pieces, glucose, amino acids, and stuff like that, they need to get absorbed into the bloodstream, right? Well, it doesn't just happen directly through the wall of the small intestine. It happens through these villi. They go into the villi, into a villus, that's one, or into the villi just in general, all right? And if I look at this blow up out here, you can see I've got this thing colored in yellow, and I've got this one in red and this one in blue. And what that really means is the red represents the arterial blood coming into the villus and branching up into capillaries, tiny blood vessels. And then the blue represents blood as it goes out. And so what happens is the nutrients that are outside here, which is in the lumen, all right, come through the wall of the villus and enter these capillaries. This is absorption of nutrients from the lumen of the intestine into the bloodstream, into the capillaries. They then travel out through this, and then they go to the rest of the body. They've been absorbed by the circulatory system, all right? So nutrients are absorbed by the villi, which is part of the structures of the layers of these organs, of this organ in particular. Now, other substances are absorbed into this yellow tube. This yellow tube is called a lacteal, and it's for the absorption of fats. Now, we're not going to get into all the different absorptive processes right now, but your teacher will likely go through that with you. So the different structures are for absorption of different types of nutrients, all right? But the main point I want to get across is the villus or the villi is for absorption of nutrients. So those are the major layers of all three of these organs, and I hope that you can see the similarities between all three of them in terms of having a mucosa, submucosa, circular and longitudinal muscle, Oblique in the stomach, admittedly just there. Glands between the two of them, rugae in the stomach, villi in the small intestine. Similarities and differences. All right? Hope that was interesting to you. See you again soon.
Don't tell me that you're sorry. That's only gonna get me mad. There was a time when I believed you before you treated me bad. I really should have seen it coming. I guess I missed the telling sign. But now it's all over, baby. This time you really crossed the line. God loves an honest woman, but me, I fell in love with you. You told a lot of crazy stories. I bet that none of them are true. If I was just a little smarter, I might have realized your aim. You only wanted to be near me so you could play the hurting game. Hurting game. So pin a medal on me, baby. I ought to wear a purple heart. I'm lucky I was only wounded. You could have tore it all apart. You'd better run a whole lot quicker, or love will get you wait and see.